Hello and guten Tag, mein Freunde. I'm Peter and here I'm telling you stories about the most interesting European cars of the 80s and 90s. Today we are talking about the first car fully developed by Porsche and the first ever Porsche with a V8 engine, Porsche 928. But before we start, please subscribe to this channel. I really need your subscriptions to make this channel more visible on YouTube and to share the stories with more people. And if you already subscribed, I really appreciate your trust. Thank you so much, and let's get back to the car. The 928 was produced for 18 years from 1977 to 1995, and just over 61,000 cars were made in total. But the story of this car began long before this, at the end of the 60s. At that time, Porsche produced only rear-engine air-cooled small sports cars, the famous 911, its modification 912, and the 914 developed together with Volkswagen and Karmann, with many political issues related to this marriage. But there were a lot of difficulties on the horizon. First of all, these models were already outdated, as well as the whole rear-engine air-cooled arrangement. The cars were still great, but there wasn't much room for further development, and the market interest began to fade out. Next, there were new future emission regulations that were difficult to implement in a small rear-engine car with limited space for the engine, catalyst, and mufflers altogether. Even more important, the US government at that time discussed a prohibition for all rear-engine cars due to concerns regarding the safety and handling of this type of cars, raised first of all in relation to the notorious Chevrolet Corvair. And those concerns were partly true. Even professional race drivers had difficulties with controlling the 911s in high-speed maneuvering. The 911 had a huge tendency to oversteer because of its heavy rear part. Was it a bug or a feature? This is a wide field for discussion, but at the end of the 60s it was a real concern for the customers. The logical answer to all these concerns was obvious. Porsche needed a new car. A car with enough room for a driver, passengers, powerful engine and all emission-related equipment. A car that would handle perfectly. And because it's a Porsche, it should be a car with a very powerful engine. The owner of the company, Ferdinand Porsche Jr., and the technical director and later chairman Ernst Furhmann thought the same way, and the development of a completely new Porsche 928 began. The idea was to step aside of pure sports car to more luxurious grand touring type of cars to compete with luxury sedans of Mercedes-Benz and BMW. At the same time, they wanted to keep a sporty DNA in the car. How could they do it? Well, first of all, it had to be a coupe with great aerodynamics and sporty appearance. But it had to be longer and more comfortable than the 911. Of course, this made the car heavier. To compensate for this, they needed a powerful engine. 6 cylinders of the 911 were not enough. Ferdinand Piëch from Audi, who was also a member of the Porsche family, proposed to join two of his favorite 5-cylinder engines together in a V10 arrangement. But this scheme was too groundbreaking for that time. And also the board of directors of Porsche didn't want to rely on Volkswagen Group too much, so the choice was made in favor of the old reliable V8 scheme. At first they wanted to go with 5 liters, but after the oil crisis of 1973 it was decreased to 4.5 liters. But such an engine, even fully made of aluminum, is heavy, so how could they keep a 50-50 weight balance? They solved this problem by using a transaxle arrangement, where the gearbox was moved to the back of the car and joined with the rear axle in a single unit. And so the whole family of Porsches of the late 70s and 80s was born. First the 928, then the 924 developed together with Audi. Actually the sales of the 924 started earlier than the 928, but the development of the 928 started first. Then came the 944 and 968. These cars are considered controversial by some Porsche enthusiasts. They think it's not truly Porsche. But spoiler alert, they all were very good cars. And the 928 was the best of them. The design of the 928 was developed by Wolfgang Möbius under the guidance of the chief designer Anatol Slapins, who is better known under the name Anatol Lapin. It was a rather large 3-door coupe with a big hatchback lid. The car had many unusual features. The most noticeable of them is styling of the frog eye pop-up headlights. Another feature, not that noticeable now, but a really breakthrough one for its time, is the plastic bumpers painted in the color of the body. It's an absolutely common thing now, but in the 70s it was a huge innovation, making the car look way more modern than anything else on the market. The car was spacious enough for 2 adults and 2 not very glutinous kids and had a lot of room for the luggage. I wouldn't call it exactly a family car, but as a daily driver, absolutely. If you could afford this. This actually was the first car fully developed by Porsche. The 911 and 912 derived from Porsche 356, which derived from Volkswagen Beetle, which in its turn allegedly derived from Tatra V570. The 914 was developed together with Volkswagen and Karmann, and the 924 was a child of an affair with Audi. So the 928 was actually the first true Porsche, whatever you may think, the first car fully developed and made by this brand. All 928s had V8 engines, but these engines were modified during the 18 years of production. The first prototypes were carbureted, but the production model got a mechanical fuel injection, which was replaced by the electronic fuel injection in 1980 for the US market and in 1984 for all other markets. At the launch in 1978, the 928 had a 4.5-liter V8 with 16 valves, 2 per cylinder, and 237 horsepower, except the American version, which had only 219 horsepower. In 1980, the S version appeared, except for the American market. In this one, the engine was increased to 4.7 liters and 296 horsepower, later increased even more to 306 horses. In 1985, a 5-liter engine with 288 horsepower was introduced in the American market. 2 years later, in 1987, the same 5-liter engine received 316 horny ponies and 4 valves per cylinder in the S4 version and became available worldwide. In 1989, when the GT version appeared, the 5-liter engine started producing 326 horsepower. And in the 1992 model year, the ultimate GTS version was presented with a 5.4-liter V8 produced 345 horsepower and impressive 369 foot-pounds or 500 Nm of torque. The top speed of different versions in years varied from 224 km per hour or 140 miles per hour to 274 km or 171 miles per hour. A specially prepared modified version of the 928 with a supercharger crossed 374 km per hour or 234 miles per hour. The 0 to 60 miles per hour time varied from 5.2 seconds for the fastest versions GT and GTS to just over 7 seconds for the oldest 928s with the automatic transmission. All engines could be coupled with a 5-speed manual dogleg transmission or with automatic one. First with 3 speeds, and later, since 1983 model year, 4 speeds. Most of the cars in the first years of productions were manual, but later the automatic gearbox prevailed. There are no exact figures on what part of the produced cars were manual and automatic, but different sources suggest that from 65 to 80% of all 928s produced were automatic, especially in the US. During its production history, the 928 didn't have major revolutionary facelifts. Instead, small evolutionary changes were made almost every year, and several versions of this car were produced in different years: S, S4, GT, GTS, and so on. Most changes were related to the engines and transmissions, but the exterior appearance also slightly changed with different spoilers, skirts, and types of wheels. The later versions are slightly bigger in all dimensions than the original ones, and slightly heavier as well. Okay, the most important question. This car, intended to replace the legendary 911 and somewhat failed in this, was it good? And the answer is yes, it was a great car. It was fast and powerful. It was actually more powerful than the naturally aspirated 911s, and somewhat even with the turbocharged ones. It was heavier than the 911, but because of the perfect 50-50 weight distribution, it had better, more predictable handling both on the straight line and in corners. The comparison tests between the 911 and 928 showed that the 928 was not slower than the 911 on the track. It was perfectly engineered, maybe even over-engineered, and virtually bulletproof. It was actually a very reliable car, and many of them made many 100,000 miles in their lives. With its galvanized body and aluminum doors, fenders and hood, the rust wasn't an issue at all. It was comfortable and convenient both for singles and for families. And it was a really fun to drive car, even with an automatic transmission. The 928 was simply a great car, the best Porsche of the 80s, and maybe one of the best cars ever built. So, why it was rejected, neglected, and almost forgotten? Everybody knows the Porsche 911, but not everyone knows the 928 and can distinguish it from, say, the 924. Why this great car didn't actually replace the 911? Well, this car had one issue. It was very expensive. It was more expensive than the top versions of the 911. At the start, the price was $28,500 in the US. That's over $130,000 today. And further versions were even more expensive. The investments into over-engineering, development and production simply didn't allow the price to be lower. It was cheaper than the hot versions of sedans of BMW and Mercedes-Benz. But Porsche had a reputation of a sports car maker. And for a sports car, the 928 was too expensive. In addition, the Porsche's board of directors underestimated the community of the customers and its devotion to outdated and dangerous air-cooled rear-engine 911s. Those car enthusiasts just didn't approve of the whole idea of a new water-cooled front-engine family of Porsche cars. Nevertheless, Porsche managed to sell over 60,000 of 928s, a really good number for such an expensive car. Porsche sold many 928s in the United States during the 18 years of its production. For the first years, the American versions were weaker than the European ones, but then the situation improved. And just 5-10 years ago, there were a lot of them on the market and you could buy one really cheap, probably just for a couple of $1,000s. Well, not anymore. Many of these cars were disassembled for parts, and the survived ones are gaining value very quickly. Fortunately, all these cars are older than 25 years now, and if you really want to buy a good one, you can look for it not only in the US, but in Europe too, and import it to the United States. And if you do want this, check out my website in the description below. In the US, you can buy now a good 928 from $15,000 to $80,000. You can find a cheaper one, but it will require some works, and may be significant. Rare GTS and GT cars with low mileage may have an asking price of over $150,000. In the UK, the current price is from 15 to 60,000 British pounds for a good car. In continental Europe, there are a lot of 928s in good condition for sale right now, and the asking prices are from 10 to 80,000 euros, with exceptionally good GTS cars up to 120,000 euros. These prices are usually negotiable. And actually, you cannot go wrong with an old Porsche. Those cars have already passed the lowest value point, and they are gaining value quickly. If you buy a good car for reasonable money and provide it with necessary regular maintenance, it will grow in value over time. So you can have a lot of fun and earn money at the same time. I would call it a great deal. Well, thank you very much for watching. If you owned a Porsche 928, please tell me about your experience. How good was this car? And did it have any flaws? And if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. New interesting stories are coming soon. Danke schön, mein Freunde, and see you next time.